Started. Welcome. Glad you're here tonight. Thanks for coming to the meeting, Mark, and sharing your wisdom once again. Okay, so tonight it is November 9th, 2021. And, the question is, once you're accepted into a college, like what's next and how do you figure out the financing part? So we're really thankful that you're here to share with us, Mark, and kind of talk us through those next steps. So I'll let you go ahead and take it away.
Thank you, Leah. So for those who are tuning in later, I imagine the concerns about paying for college will happen once you start thinking a bit more about it in the early spring. If that's your situation and you're worried about it, you have a unique situation or specific questions, you can reach me at mark@brainsandbrawnllc.com, or you can reach me at 901-231-5448. You guys can call me, email me anytime, okay? I know right now at this moment, if you're watching this later, might be a little less new, but a lot of you have acceptances and some really good offers out there. So we want to talk about how to not only pay for college in general, but also how to take advantage of those offers that you may already have in a way that can help. And a lot of students don't do this, make other competing colleges potentially offer you even more. So we'll get into that, but there's a lot of information out there about it. I can talk you through it. I do this every year with my one-on-one clients. It's called writing letters of appeal. There's some really unique ways that you can go say, hey, look, this school offered me this. I really want to go to you guys, but financial, restraints are there. So can we find a way to meet in the middle? And more often than not, you'd be surprised. People have no problem trying to negotiate a new car down a little bit, but they never think to do that with their college education. College educations are actually a much bigger chunk of the US debt, so should be where you start, okay? If you have questions, like I said, please do not hesitate to reach out. Today will be a lot of repetitive information for most of us, because I know I've talked about the different methodologies to afford college in the past, but this is meant to target the moments from getting accepted, like, okay, I have my letter of acceptance. Now, how do I figure out how to afford this? Okay. It's not thinking about, generally how to find the right college, but we do go into that a bit, because I know that not all of you have submitted your regular decision applications yet. So first of all, we're going to talk really briefly about trying to choose the right school from the onset. Okay. That's important because you want to make sure you're looking at schools that are a good fit for you or your child, depending on who you are. But remember, we've already discussed this. If you have submitted early action or early decision, you should hear about the middle of December. December 15th tends to be your sweet spot there. Some, though, may not release their actual notice until early or mid-January. The school should tell you when they're targeting their release dates. And honestly, nowadays, with everything being electronic, it's much more accurate than it was in years past. Okay. Be on the lookout. Make sure that you regularly check the email and the spam folder of whichever email address you applied with. I see this every year where kids miss acceptances and they miss opportunities for things like scholarships. And they honestly sometimes miss things that they should have submitted. Hey, we're waiting on this. Oh, never submitted my FAFSA to this school because you didn't put in the code. So just make sure you're checking those emails regularly, okay? Regular decision. So the deadline for the application cycle, like mentioned before, typically December 31st, but can go as late January, okay? You need to check with your school. I'm giving you generalities. These are not live or die. You need to look at it. Rolling admission, though, is something that a lot of students are applying to rolling admission schools, I've found this year. It depends on the application and how big of a school typically, but in general, getting your application in there early is better than late, okay? Rolling admission means there is no specific deadline, but they will accept students as they apply, and they have a finite number of seats, and when those seats are filled, that's it, okay? So there is kind of a deadline here, and the earlier the better. So when we're talking about this, we've already mentioned a lot of these things, but I do like to reiterate it because I know a lot of people are thinking about their regular decision right now. So you should be thinking through a lot of things when you're picking the right college. Think about location, the actual size of the school. Are you comfortable going to a school that has 30,000 kids, or do you want a school that has 3,000 kids? I've mentioned that a ton, but so many times I see kids go to schools and they're just like overwhelmed with the general size. The majors, if you want to go into a particular major, make sure your school offers it. People on campus, opportunities outside of the classroom. So like what's the town, what's the city? And here's a big one. We're going to talk a lot about the cost here and the selectivity. You know, if a school has a 5% acceptance rate and that's the only school you apply to, statistically, you're not doing yourself a service. So make sure you're being smart there. So one thing I like to start with, because a lot of people are like, I would never let my son or daughter be more than 5 hours away. So that crosses a lot off the list. Quality of the academics there, the size, the overall cost, the environment, and honestly, this is important, the resources and support systems. A lot of students get to schools and they find that there are fewer resources there than they're used to. Crosstown does a good job of helping you students out with a lot of things. Do you want to find a school that has similar stuff? I would imagine you do. Do some research there before you apply. Rank these priorities. So this is something that we've talked about using Naviance for. We've also talked about using the Common App. Common App partners everything up on there. This is extremely important. I know we've gone through all this in the past, but you definitely need to know what your priorities are. That'll also help you figure out when you're going to apply to each school. Early is already passed. If you're considering roll-in admissions and the school is really interesting to you, you should probably get that application out there before your regular decision, okay? This is going to determine where you spend the next 4 years, so make sure you know enough about the school to make an informed decision. This is something that if you've had any college interviews, and I know a few of you guys have heard back from colleges wanting some interviews here and there. So when you hear things like this, they're going to always ask you, where do you see yourself in 4 years? Where do you see yourself in 10 years? Okay. You may not know what you want to study necessarily, but if you have a general idea of what you want to do, that's okay. There will be a lot of financial impact for most people with college. College debt is the second biggest area of debt in America behind mortgage debt. Don't dig yourself into a hole, okay? But colleges, generally, US institutions are fairly expensive. So let's find opportunities here to lessen this burden. Private colleges have slightly higher overall price tags, but they also typically give more need-based financial aid, which if you haven't heard of that term before, you need to go back and watch the entire library of videos I've produced this year for Crosstown. Let's look at talking about comparing financial aid rewards. Okay, so if you are getting an offer from a school, you need to understand what the money they're saying they're going to give you is. Okay, and this is something that is extremely confusing and it's very contingent upon the school. Public schools tend to call financial aid a loan, which is not financial aid in my opinion. You have to pay that back. Okay, so when they talk about their umbrella of financial aid resources, if they're giving you a federal subsidized loan with a 5.2% interest rate, that means that you've got to pay that bad boy back. The subsidization that the school and the government provides means that you don't have to pay interest while you're an undergrad, but you do 6 months after you graduate. If it's not subsidized, you have to pay that interest while you're an undergrad, okay? This is extremely important. Grants, scholarships, need-based financial aid, you do not have to pay those things back. Loans, which sometimes gets lumped into that umbrella term, financial aid, you do have to pay those back. Okay. When you get an acceptance from a school, unless you've applied early decision, which is your binding methodology for applying, and you don't have any recourse other than to go there. If you have applied early action, you should be looking for your offer financially too. Okay. You should be looking for how much is this going to cost me? Be sure to look at the obvious room, board, tuition, but also some of those things that you might not actually think about. How much do the books cost? How far away is this school? How much is it going to cost me every time to get from point A to point B if I want to go from school to home for Thanksgiving and October break and the holiday break in the winter and spring break? You can rack up several $1,000s of airline tickets, especially right now with how plane tickets are going. Go to schools if you have the opportunity, okay? Ask them questions. Know what you're looking for. Okay, this comes with doing a little research. Campus tours can be expensive, but everything in the world can be found online now. Okay, do everything you can to research things online. I really encourage everyone who's unable to visit a school in person to go look at YouTube videos. You can find anything in the world on YouTube. You can find videos from kids who are there, who will tell you the good and the bad, the things that will be incredibly important for you to know that you'll never find on a virtual tour. A virtual tour is never going to talk about the crime rate in the city unless it's a good one. They're only going to talk about the things that are extremely positive. Okay, so when you go to that city, you would obviously notice things that are positive and negative. Virtual tour will not give you that. Someone who's giving you a YouTube video or something like that, they'll actually talk about those things. So I think it's a helpful resource. It's free as well. So here's some things to definitely avoid. I'm also going to add in just like the idealistic or the ideological, pedestal that a lot of students create. They work their tail off to get to a certain school. They don't have the opportunity to visit it, but they're like, man, I want to go to this school more than anything in the world. And then it's very difficult to convince them otherwise, even if all of the resources and all of the things that they look at indicate it's not a good fit for them after all. Okay. Don't rush the process. This takes time. You're going to be spending 4 years there. Okay. Don't go to a school just for the social life. There is going to be so many other things that you do. Okay. Superficial aspects. Okay. If the school shows you their flashiest new dorm, you should ask, is that a freshman dorm? How many of these do you have? Is this the only one? Is this your tour dorm? How many students live in places like this? This is a very common thing. I see students all the time who come back to me after they get to a college campus. They're like, yeah, this is not the dorm I was shown. Turns out that dorm doesn't really exist. Okay, maybe that's their new residential college that no one gets to go to. And, while the parents are very important in these decisions, you should understand that student will be living there. Parent will not be living there. So make sure that the student agrees that it's a good fit for them. That's my personal bias, but it's extremely important, even if mom and dad are footing the bill. Now let's get into the nuts and bolts of the financing conversation. So once you get accepted, what are you going to do? You're going to look at your true cost to attend. And remember, room and board and tuition are your big things. But what about student fees? Student fees are things that may not make sense to you on paper. Some schools charge you to take finals. Some schools charge you for other things like using the gym and the laundry and things like that. The books, okay? The IRS lets you deduct, I think it's $1,400 a semester for books. College textbooks are notoriously expensive, okay? They can run you literally $1,400. They can cost you more than that. What are your deadlines for financial aid applications? Are there scholarships internally? Remember, we talked earlier about internal scholarships that are school specific. So school A offers this scholarship. If you get it, it only works for that school, doesn't go elsewhere. There's also external scholarships we'll talk about that are just general ones. The Coca-Cola scholarship that just closed in October, you can use that for any school in America. When do you actually receive your financial aid offer? You should be asking this or looking this up as soon as you get accepted. When am I going to know how much you guys are going to charge me? Okay. This is a very important one. Is the school you are accepted into willing to match or at least negotiate down to the level of another college or university's financial aid offer? And are there work study opportunities? Now, keep in mind, most work study, if you remember from our earlier videos, cap your hours at 19 hours. That's just generally what you're going to see. So if you're making $20 an hour at $19 and 19 hours a week, you can do the math on how much that's going to contribute. It's better than nothing, but it's not going to pay for 60 grand of tuition. Have these tuition and other expenses increased over the past 3 years? And are they looking like they're about to? Do you lock in your deal? Like if they charge you 52 grand a year and you're like, okay, I'm okay with that. Is that going to become 62 grand next year? Right? Make sure you're looking at all of this information. Comparing your financial aid awards. So when you talk to your parents, there's a lot to consider. I honestly think one thing that's often overlooked is not only the cost of that particular institution and how much it will be out of pocket for you, but also go to that US government college scorecard and look at first year average earnings from those institutions, because eventually you're going to want to pay back any debt that you do inherit by going to college, and knowing what you can expect to make based off of that university or college's general reputation and historical evidence based off of the last 3 years can be really helpful for you. If kids that have gone to that institution have had a really hard time finding a job, then I would discourage spending a ton of money on it if you are interested in trying to use loans in any way. If you're going to be able to go there for free, how much money you make should never be what dictates what you do with your life. I want to be careful when I say that, but don't dig yourself in a financial hole. Don't set yourself up to be in a really bad situation. Okay. You can use the College Board tool here to compare the financial aid awards that you get. I strongly advise doing that. It's a free tool. Add in little things like the work study, which will add a couple grand per semester, but don't rely on something like this when it's not realistic. You are capped on how many hours you can work. So don't go, into debt because you didn't do the math correctly before you get to school. Okay. Now, this is something I talk a lot about with my one-on-one clients. I do a lot of these every year. This is extremely important, okay? In general, you will assume that if you get accepted into multiple colleges, you'll have a list of which colleges you're most interested in going to. And you also have a list in order of how much each will cost, okay? It's very typical that these lists are not in the exact same order. If a particular institution has made you a really generous offer, which I know a lot of seniors right now are sitting on an acceptance with full tuition coverage, TSU, that's extremely helpful. Congrats to all of you who are listening retroactively on that. You have that. Let's, for this hypothetical situation, assume that that's not your number one top choice, but you do get into your number one top choice and they are charging you more. You do have the ability in many circumstances to write a letter to that particular school that you're most interested in going to and just explain the situation. I'm very interested in going to your school, whatever that school might be. And I obviously have placed this as my top choice. However, the financial situation that I am in makes this school's offer much more appealing. They are charging me this much. I understand that there is a difference in these institutions. I also recognize that my own preferences have automatically placed you higher. However, is there anything you could do to meet me in the middle? I'm really interested in trying to go to college for as little out of pocket as I can. Author the letter. I like for students to write these letters. I prefer that over the parents. I think it's way more authentic for the student to say, I'm the one impacted by not only where I go to school, but also by the financial decisions that I make. I'm taking responsibility and I'm just asking, okay? Watch ego. I'm always careful with these letters, like, you know, acting like they necessarily owe you anything is not the way to go into these. Just make sure that you come across as very thankful, grateful for their time, be genuine, outline the dollars and cents of what you're actually looking at. Don't lie. Make sure you actually do have another offer that's better. If you do that, these people do this for a living, so they'll understand that you're not being authentic. But just outline the differences. Hey guys, I'm really interested in going to this school. I just can't justify the cost right now. Is there any chance you guys could meet me in the middle? Very rarely are they going to say, all right, we're charging you guys 35 grand a year. This other school gave you a full ride. We'll give you a full ride. But they might say, all right, we're going to take that 35 grand down to 25 grand. Okay. While that's not the same as free, it's $10,000 a year. It's $40,000 a student loan. And that $40,000 a student loan will turn into 70 once you've done like all of the interest and everything else that's accrued. So it's extremely helpful. If nothing else, you can know you tried. Okay. If there are other extenuating circumstances, such as huge changes in your family's finances, you should absolutely submit corrected FAFSA reports to these schools. You should do this to every school. The conversation I'm having now is much more typical. However, in light of COVID and all of the financial impacts this may or may not have on your family, this can be applicable, which is why we added it here. So if something's changed, if mom or dad lost their job, or if something happened in your family that has changed your financial ability to contribute, has changed, to use a FAFSA term, your expected financial contribution, you should absolutely submit a FAFSA correction, and you should send that to every school, not only your top choice, okay? And if you know you made an error, I hate to see that people make errors on these things, but it happens, you can also submit a correction. Like I said, they're probably not going to cover more than a $10,000 gap. Student loans are not the worst thing in the world. As we've mentioned before, I strongly prefer looking at public federal loans over their private counterparts. You're going to get pulled into the nice commercials and everything else that the private loan companies do. They're going to tell you don't have to pay them back until 6 months after you graduate. That's what the federal ones do already, so don't worry about that. It's not really that appealing. Their interest rates are way higher, okay? I didn't take out hardly anything in terms of student loans, but for transparency's sake, my interest rate whenever I graduated from Yale for my little bit of private loans was 12%. Okay, that is absolutely crazy for you parents who have mortgages and things like that. Imagine if you're paying 12%. Okay, yeah, I was paying like 90% of my payment was interest. Okay, don't do that to yourself. Get the federal if you can do it. If you can't, call me, shoot me an email, mark@brainsandbrawnllc.com. We'll talk about it. we'll find something. But that's a really problematic situation to be in. Okay. When you write these, make sure you're addressing it to whoever your financial aid or your financial representative is with that school. If you're looking at a school like University of Tennessee at Knoxville, there's going to be somebody for Shelby County. Okay. And honestly, I could probably connect you with that person, or Miss Keys could. If it's a school that's a little further away, like University of Colorado at Boulder, you're probably going to find somebody who represents Tennessee. But ask somebody specifically, Mr. Johnson. Call them out. Like, make sure that they read it. Okay. Give them a clear ask. School A charged me 10 grand a year. You guys are telling me it's going to be 22. Is there any way you can meet the middle? Here's why. I can't afford 22 grand a year. Okay. If there are any details of special circumstances, that's okay to include those. Include documentation. Show proof of what your other offer is if you have it. Okay. Give them a finite, specific, here's what I need. And then ask them for next steps and be extremely grateful for their time. Okay. If you want me to review these, I typically don't go through everything like this with college applications because I just don't have the time, but I will absolutely look at these. Okay. So if you author a letter of appeal, send it to me, explain, send me exactly what you plan to send to them, and I will give you my perspective on if it's appropriate to send to the school. If you can write a letter and it takes you an hour to do it and it saves you $10,000 a year, you should absolutely do it. Okay. If it saves you $500 a year, that's $500 an hour. You should still do it. Okay. As long as you're grateful, professional, and you're giving them a fair argument, you're not going to lose any kind of acceptance. Trust me. If you come across as arrogance or anything like that, or if you're, demeaning to the school, yeah, might not be good. But generally, I've never seen any student of mine lose acceptances for anything like this. Send me what you have though before you send it to them, because I'd like to look at it. Okay. Make sure the student writes it. Be careful in how you word this. Don't say like, even though your school isn't as highly ranked as the other school, you're trying to charge me more. It's not the way to do this. Be clear. Don't write them a novel. Even though I'm long-winded, I like for these to be succinct. Make sure you don't have any grammatical errors in it. Okay. Pretty simple. Send them to me. Okay. Make sure that they allow this before you go any further. So contact the school's financial aid office to see if you can do this. Find the best person. Like I said, research who it is. Determine how much to ask for. You can talk to me about this. Gather the documents. You should have a competing offer before you do this. Write a letter that's no more than a page. Submit your letter, the documentation, proof that you have another offer, and anything else that they may require. Okay. I know we don't have the biggest audience today, but I want to make sure we don't have any questions.
I'd love to ask a question that I was recently asked by a student. One of our seniors, or a couple of our seniors, have they've applied rolling admissions, right? So they've heard back from their schools and they've been accepted to a few different schools. And the question that came up was that they said, well, don't I need to go ahead and apply for housing now that I've been accepted to all of these schools? And I was curious about whether or not the students would need to, accept the invitation to come to the school before actually applying for housing, or if that's something that they could just do anyhow, whether or not they had decided that that is the school for them.
That's a good question. So it depends on the school. I know that I always say that, but it does. I would look at the school, and if you can apply for housing without having to submit your security deposit, which is typically a $500 deposit to actually hold your seat for the May 1st matriculation deadline, then I would go ahead and apply for it just so you can settle that and alleviate the potential anxiety. However, if you do have the wherewithal financially to go visit the school first before doing anything else, I strongly advise doing that, especially since we have these upcoming breaks like the Thanksgiving break and the winter break. If you have the chance to go visit them and only miss no school or maybe a day of school, Ms. Keith, to make that happen, I would do that before you ever do anything else. In terms of actually applying for housing and everything else, most schools have pretty strong abilities to retain enough housing for all of the freshmen. I don't think you're going to end up in a terrible situation. They don't necessarily prioritize school housing first come, first serve. So it's not like the first person to apply is going to get the nicest dorm or anything like that. School to school is different, but at this point in the year, you have plenty of time. If we were having this conversation the last week of April, I would have a very different suggestion. It would be go ahead and get that done because May 1st is right around the corner. Not now. I think you have time. I would also save on that security deposit, which is typically non-refundable, the $500 deposit to secure your seat, until I'm more confident, especially since we're not even to the early response deadline, which is December 15th for most schools. Once you start getting into March or April, yeah, I would start thinking about that.
Yeah, thank you so much. I know that will ease a lot of anxieties because, like you said, you get the acceptance letter and then like there's the worry of paying for everything, which is what you've addressed tonight. But yeah, just there are all of these other nuts and bolts that come up after the acceptance that that it's important to know how to navigate those. So thank you.
Yeah. And just to close that up, also some schools do have priority housing ways of doing things. So like if they're like the first person that's kind of to incentivize you to go ahead and get everything handled to alleviate their stress. If you can do that without paying the $500, I'd do that. If it allows you to do that without securing a security deposit, just to get, secure a potential room and board situation that's the best situation possible. But most schools are not going to use that.
All right. Miss Harper, or I believe that's Dorothy Jones. I'm going to take a guess, even though it doesn't say Jones on there. But do you all have any questions that you'd like to ask Mark while he's here? Let me know. Well, if anything comes up that you would like to ask Mark or anyone who is watching this video, again, you can email him at mark@brainsandbrawnllc.com. Mark, I'll let you jump in with your cell phone number.
That's all right. Yeah, it's 901-231-5448.
Yeah, and thanks again for making yourself so accessible and available to our families. I mean, it's really such a wonderful thing for us to be able to reach out to you because of your wisdom and for this advice in this situation. So thank you.
Happy to help. I'm sure that a lot of people will be referring back to this once December 15th has passed and once people know a little bit more. But guys, if you have questions at that point, still reach out.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Mark. And thanks everybody for listening, and we will see you all soon. Bye.
Thanks, Ms. Keith. Bye.
Yeah, thank you.